Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it everywhere and earn even more money. All in one place, and it's for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works. Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup looks like, you can start creating today. Then you can distribute your podcast to Spotify and everywhere else podcasts are heard. Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions. Best of all, it's totally free with no catch. Ever since we discovered Spotify for Podcasters, we feel like having options like video podcasts, Q&A, and polls has let us be creative on a whole other level. I highly recommend you give it a try. So download Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters to get started. Welcome back, everybody. I feel like I always start it with I'm so excited. So maybe I am very enthusiastic to talk on this subject today. I actually have a fantastic guest with me who is going to help digest all of this information because, yet again, we are here to expose worldwide dream builders. And a disclaimer, my beef is with worldwide. My beef is my own opinion. My guest beef's her opinion. We have no beef with the Amway Corporation simply because they're a product company. All of the names of our upline have been changed, but I do feel it's so important that we talk about this. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my guest. You guys know her. You guys love her. Welcome back, Hope.
Hello.
This topic actually, Hope has brought up a number of times. We are actually going to be talking today about the book that Worldwide has on their list, that this is a book that they recommend for married couples. This book is called Love and Respect. I'm probably going to butcher this asshole's name because Dr. Emerson Eggerichs?
Eggerichs.
Yeah, Eggerichs.
Yeah.
So, Hope, you're the one who brought this book to my attention. Of course, I was a part of Worldwide. But I was in Worldwide as a single. And even though I was a single, they would tell me to read all of these relationship books. The one that I did read was the one that is by the pastor of Worldwide. And because he's a well-known author, his name is Paul Sika. So I read his book, and that book was very alarming in its own ways with a lot of red flags. But what is it about this book that made you cringe? Why is it that you felt this book was so necessary to talk about?
It's a hard thing to explain, but basically me and my husband just went through some dumb stuff. And when we were counseling upline, they basically recommended this book, and I suck at reading. I'm not gonna lie. I'm not,
Same.
I'm dyslexic, so it's tough for me to read a book. But my husband was reading it, and while he was reading it, he started to change. His demeanor started to change. His attitude towards me started to change. And I was like, I don't think this book's good. And that's all I kind of felt. I was like, I haven't read it yet, but I feel like it's not great. And then he was like, no, you should read it. It's really powerful. Worldwide's recommending it. There's a reason they're recommending it, because they know more than we do, is basically how we thought at the time. So we followed their lead. And yeah, he was reading it. I eventually read it and I went, oh, no. This is not good. This is very not good for women. If this gets into the wrong dude's hands, this could be bad, because it even changed Fisher's attitude towards things. And he's like the sweetest man on the planet. And if he wasn't, I would be a lot more scared. So, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I mean, every time I've talked to you and Fisher, just super calm guy, even he explained in our previous episode about toxic positivity that this was something that he didn't feel comfortable with, but because of how Worldwide was, it was very peer pressure almost. I really empathize with that because I read this book, and now that I've read it, I can see exactly what you're saying. Because I told my partner, I was like, I was complaining about this book the entire time I'm reading it. I can't believe that there's people who believe in this. And my significant other, he's not religious, not at all. I think that he appeals to me in ways that I need to be, but other than that, he's not religious, and that's okay. And when I was explaining some of the things in this book, he was like, do people actually believe in this? I was like, yeah. All of Worldwide who is struggling in their marriage, this is the book that they're recommending. I cannot imagine as a wife reading this and being like, no, how are you pushing this to my husband? There's no way.
Yeah, it was vile. It confused me because I grew up with a really strong dad, and my dad very much taught me how to be an independent daughter, because I'm an only
Yeah.
child too. So like my dad basically drilled into my brain never to let anybody take advantage of me like that way. So reading this book basically contradicted everything I was ever taught. And I didn't
Yeah.
love that. So it gave me like the heebie-jeebies. It didn't feel great. So
Yeah. Oh, same. Yeah. Actually, my dad is very similar, but my stepmom, she is super similar. Like they are just both very, very strong people who have opinions and will not hesitate to tell you what they are. I mean, of course, they're super nice people. They'll be nice about it, but they don't sugarcoat stuff.
mhm.
And reading this, there's no way. I mean, I was telling you before we started recording that, but I was listening to it mostly, and there was no way I was going to let my kids listen to this book. There was no way. I have a 10-year-old who is kind of in that really vulnerable time in his life. And this is not the stuff. In fact, I was like, buddy, just remember both men and women need respect. Like you have to be respectful. In the introduction, they start out quoting the Beatles. So he says, "You may remember how the Beatles sang, 'All you need is love.'" I absolutely disagree with that conclusion. That was for me the first red flag. The first sentence of the introduction was a huge red flag.
It's
And the
so
thing is,
bad.
it is. And the thing is that people in worldwide, right? They'll be like, "Oh, well, they don't know. A doctor wrote this book and they just don't know what they're talking about." But let me tell you, things
No
that are in
kidding.
this book, how can this man be serious? So we go through the introduction, right? And he says 5 out of 10 marriages today are ending in divorce because love alone is not enough. And sure, I totally agree, love's not enough. But the essence of this book is that women are driven by love and men are driven by respect. And it very much pushes that narrative that women are supposed to be these subservient, quiet wives, and men are supposed to be these dominant figure husbands. And I hope you had a fantastic point, and I think the toxic positivity episode, where you said that you sat down and you asked, why can't I be the leader of the household?
Yeah. It made no sense to me because for one, I was the extrovert and that was the thing. Like it was like, and I was also the breadwinner. And okay, it makes sense to me that I would be the one to handle the household money stuff. And I was, so why not? And there was no answer whatsoever as to why I couldn't do it. I'm also gonna trail back a little bit because I totally forgot to tell you this, but there's a sequel to this book called How Mothers Should Respect Their Sons. And
Excuse me.
yeah, it's really bad. Like, and it talks about how to respect your sons and not have too much authority over them. It's
I got to
really
read
bad.
this book
Yeah, you
next.
gotta read that one. That one would make you even more. I've never read it, but I heard somebody talk about it and I was like, that is horrifying. That's a parent-child relationship.
Yeah, especially to a mom of boys. I have 2 boys. Like, I didn't want them listening to this book. And further along in the book, they say, well, he says, how would you feel if your son married a woman like you? And I wrote in my notes, he could only be so lucky.
Yeah, no kidding.
Because the frustrating part is that throughout this book, he talks a lot about how women nag. Women have, what did he call it? Venom. He like referred to the things that supposedly women are doing as venom. I'm sure it'll come up in my notes somewhere. And it's like the same point regurgitated so many different ways in the book. It's literally the same words, just written out differently, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
I have so many notes here because I also have, and I'll post a picture of it, but I have the workbook that goes along with this. Okay. And there's one for, there's sections with every part of the book. So essentially you're supposed to read this book with your partner and then you're supposed to go through and do this workbook, right? Did you guys do the workbook?
No. I secretly
Thank
read the book
goodness.
behind Fisher's back, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
really?
Yeah, because I was like, I don't get it. And he's like, well, if you haven't read it, then you can't really talk much about it. So I like secretly read it behind his back. And then I was like, I still don't get it. Like at a certain point, I was
So,
just like, I still don't understand.
I mean, I remember you saying that your upline was heavily talking about this book, but is this predominantly pushed to the men in marriages?
Yeah. Well, so something like kind of like bad happened. I've mentioned this a few times between me and Fisher.
Sure.
And it was like a big enough deal that we had to go to our upline about it. And when I went to
Yeah.
my upline about it, they were basically like, you can't do anything. Like they were like, because I was trying to set up boundaries for myself, right? Like I was like,
Yeah.
I want this, 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 and this. And they were like, no, you can't do that. That's disrespectful.
That's insane. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't matter what it was, whatever is happening within yourself,
Yeah.
you're 100% allowed to set up boundaries, even if it is your
Yeah.
husband. I
Yeah.
mean, we're allowed to set boundaries with whoever the hell we want. It's healthy.
Yeah.
It's healthy to have boundaries with your kids. It's healthy to
Yep.
have boundaries with your partner, with your friends. Like, actually, that's something that we're talking about in my therapy group, and I love
Yeah.
it because, they talk about, and we talked about this in the last episode too, where you get to choose your safe people.
Hmm.
And in that moment in time, you were being told that your safe people are your upline. But
Yeah.
what are they doing to help you and your need to heal? It's not like you went to them and said, "Hey, I want a divorce." You said, "Hey, you're
No.
here to be my mentors,
Mhm.
mentor me." But
Yeah.
then you're met with, "Oh, you're being disrespectful." What? Because of this stupid book?
Yeah. And it was so bad because like they went through something similar. And when I went to John and Jane and I was like, hey, I need help, John was like, you can't do anything. Of course he would say that. And then I went to Jane and I was like, are you hear what he's saying, right? Like you've got to know as another girl that this isn't okay. And she was basically like, I respect my husband. And I was like, you have to be able to speak out. You have to be able to hold boundaries that way, or you'll become resentful of your spouse.
Yeah.
And that was the most dangerous thing to me. And it felt like every time I was in a room with those like three, including Fisher at the time, sorry, but it felt like I was under attack because I kept trying to say my side, and everybody was just like, no, you're wrong because you don't think the right way. But
That's
like,
gaslighting.
yeah, but in the end, like this book is what made me quit. So there's the light at the end of the tunnel, I guess, of this
Oh, yeah.
really crappy
I
book.
mean,
But
I'm really glad that you had the sense to read this book. And I mean, one, it's so admirable that both you and Fisher have even come out on this podcast and said, we don't like how our marriage was because of Worldwide. And you guys are obviously doing 10 times better now, which is fantastic.
yeah.
Like, neither of you guys are holding resentment. It is amazing to see. And like we've mentioned before, we don't judge because we've been there. We know what
Mhm.
this cult like environment has pulled us into, what it has made us do, what it has made us become. And so I say all of this because, of course, like we're not here to bash anybody. We're here to talk about how this book has created situations that are not healthy. And that really, I'm glad again, like I said, I'm really glad that you had the sense to read the book and were like, no, this is not okay. Because I wonder how many women in Worldwide have read this book and have had to submit and say, yeah, no, that's a great idea. It's a great idea that this guy says a wife can fulfill her need to be loved by giving her husband what he needs, which is respect. That's a quote
Uh,
from the book.
It's so bad. And then when they talk about the crazy cycle too, I don't know if you're probably getting there, but
Yeah.
it was not really like outright said, but there was a pretty good indication that the only way to break the crazy cycle of a wife feeling unloved and a husband feeling disrespected is to just start respecting your husband. Like it was like, oh, it's really hard to love your wife unconditionally when she's disrespecting you. And it's like the wife had to take the first step. It was always the wife that talked about in that crazy cycle. That bugged me a lot.
Essentially, he creates this like diagram of the crazy cycle, and it's like a circle, and I can post it as well. Basically, it's like without love she reacts, without respect he reacts. And he tries to put in the book too that, oh well, I'm not saying that women don't deserve respect, but I am focusing on what each gender is driven by. And let me tell you, as much as I love being loved, I also need respect.
Yeah. And that's a sense of love in itself. You know what I mean? And that's the thing that made no sense to me is it was like how like I get that you're loved differently, but that I feel like instead of splitting it by gender, it should be split from person to person because I feel like the dynamics there are so different between each person in a relationship. It's not just the husband and wife or boyfriend and girlfriend. It's not just divided that way. Like there's so
Yeah.
many other factors and they just
Yeah,
never considered
absolutely.
that.
They don't. And he goes on to say, ironically, the deepest need of the wife to feel love is undermined by her disrespect. These are quotes. You can't make this up. I'm just
This
saying, like,
book came out in 2004. Like this isn't like a book from the 80s. Like it came out 19 years ago. It's fairly new. Like this is
I
yeah.
I am sometimes part of this just I am so speechless I'm speechless. And it seems like, I mean, he blames his mom for him going to military school. I thought that was hilarious. I was like, oh, so it's your mom's being disrespectful to your dad's fault that you had to go to military school?
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, it
I don't
didn't.
get that. He definitely goes into his parents' relationship, but
Yeah.
I know a lot of it was the fact that his dad felt disrespected, and he as a kid had no idea that that was going on.
Yeah.
And you know what it was? I actually just got to this part. His dad didn't like that his mom could fend for herself, that she could take care of herself. Personally, being somebody who has strived so hard to be self-sufficient, I cannot fathom having a partner who can't take care of themselves.
Yeah, what man wants another child to take care of? Like, that's what it sounds
Yeah,
like.
that's what it feels like. It feels like I'm supposed to treat my partner like he's my dad and I need to respect him. Because when I think of respect, I absolutely think of my father figure or my
Yeah.
actual dad. But you know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the person who has instilled me to respect my elders, who has taught me to respect other people. I don't
Right.
just need to respect my husband.
Yeah.
And the way that he goes through this, like, so here's another. I have so many quotes in here that I just can't get over. So this one says, during those years, it was in chapter 1 when he was talking about, how poor men, basically, during those years, the feminists, and he talks about feminists a lot in this book in disdain. He hates feminists. So during those years, the feminists were going full blast. Men didn't talk about being disrespected by women. That would have been arrogant. And in church circles, it would have been considered a terrible lack of humility. Poor men.
Yeah, like that is horrifying. And the weirdest part is he talks about like divorces, like one in two, like 50% of people are getting divorced.
Yeah.
Our divorce rate's lower than it ever has been. It was the highest in the 70s and 80s. And it was the
Yeah.
highest because the women went out to work for the first time and they couldn't figure out how they were handling the dynamic of the family.
Yeah.
And he's basically just regurgitating that. He's going, the women need to go back to taking care of the household and the men need to go out and fight for their spouse. Like, but times don't work like that anymore. We don't get to do that anymore. And
No.
can't preach that.
It's really frustrating because and I was actually talking to Christina about this in the previous episode that I had with her, was that they don't talk about how challenging it is for women to stay home. It's not fun. I love my kiddos and I love the fact that I get this time with them, but it's not easy. It's very lonely. It's very isolating. And a lot of the time you just end up just becoming a hermit because you don't leave the house. I don't care how much money you have. It is hard, especially when you have neurodivergent children. There's no mention of that. It's like my son, my youngest, has autism. And I feel for parents who have children with ADHD and autism because that's one, what I can relate to. But two, it's like there's so many aspects of these different developmental things that kids can't control. And no matter how many therapies they're in, it's going to be day by day. Even no matter what child they are, they're going to be day by day. I don't think anybody's blessed with a perfect child who sits at home quietly and does everything they're supposed to. If they do, they have a robot or a really good dog, or cat, maybe cat probably. But either way, I think the way that they push that narrative that women need to stay home with their kids and that people should just be women are just there for bearing children. They're so excited about parenthood. It's not for everybody. Not everybody wants to be a parent, and that's okay. If there's women out there don't want kids, don't have them. You should never be forced into feeling like you need to have kids. Ain't no man or person on this planet who's going to force you to have kids. I'm never going to preach that. And this book is seriously preaching that. The way that this man hates women, dude. And it comes through very clear because now we have another fun quote. Not every woman has this problem. So he's talking about, what is he talking about beforehand? Oh, that women are impatient and they have a sense of unfriendliness. So it says, not every woman has this problem, but I have counseled many who admit they do have their periods of negativity concerning husbands or their children. Sometimes this is known as PMS, or as he likes to call it, pre-murder syndrome. Everyone ducks for cover when mom is in that kind of mood. No one doubts her basic mother love, but sometimes they're not so sure she really likes them.
There's so many layers to that, man. Because We can't have a bad day.
Nope.
You know what I mean? Like, you're not allowed to have a bad day. And then the amount of things, like, you're touched by a little human all day long. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
That's
you're
hard.
overstimulated.
Yep.
You know what I mean? And then you have to cook dinner, and then you got to make sure their bedtime's ready. Then you got to do bath time. Then you got to do this. Like, my husband's a great help. I'm very lucky to have Fisher as a great help. Not a lot of women have that. And it can cause irritability. It can cause them to be like, is this it? Like, is this all? Is this all? And it's like, and then they twist it in a way that it's her fault. Like, that's so backwards.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And there's a song actually. It's I don't know if you guys are country music fans or not. So if I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's a song by Reba McEntire called "Is There a Life Out There?" It's essentially about a mom who has two kids. She's very overwhelmed. She got married in her 20s, and that's the essence of the song. Is there a life out there? And the music video is fantastic. She, comes full circle with it and has learned so much from her children. She graduates college in the video, but essentially this song is that. And I remember I have thought that song time and time again because I was so young when I had kids. And I can't imagine how many women in worldwide can relate to that message, because I know for me, and this is very vulnerable for me to say, but you do start to question, was this the right choice for me? And you never dislike your kids, but I don't know a mom out there who hasn't seriously thought like, this sucks. Like, this is hard for me. And they push the narrative that kids are fantastic. Kids are wonderful. You want to get free for your kids, but then they end up pushing these kids. I mean, you're talking about 18, 19-year-olds getting into the business, getting married, and pushing children so quickly
That was
that
me.
they don't have time to think about it. Right. I
Yeah.
empathize.
Yeah.
I really
Like,
do. I can't imagine.
we got engaged when we were 21, I think. Yeah, we were 21, and then I had my son at 23. But the weird part is they didn't push kids on us. They actually did the
Really?
opposite. They really didn't want us
Oh.
to have kids yet. So they wanted us to be diamond first. So John and
Oh.
Jane are 8 years older than us, and we had our sons 2 months apart because they were just like, hey, I can't wait anymore to go diamond. Like, I need to have a
Right.
child. I'm in my 30s now. Like, I
Yeah.
want to have
Yeah.
a
If you
child.
want kids, the fact that they were deterring that too, that's kind of like both are really strange, because so I actually, in my line of sponsorship, same thing. John and Barbara, Taylor and his wife. In fact, Taylor and his wife announced that they were pregnant when they went diamond. And if you're not familiar, Taylor is the club owner. Everybody knows who the hell that is. As soon as she got pregnant, I'm telling you, down the line, like they say, duplication, her emerald got pregnant. Their platinum, so the emerald, the Syrian guy and his wife, she was pregnant. Their downline, who was my upline's children, she was pregnant. Like the main ladies in my line of sponsorship, with the exception of Barbara, were pregnant. And people in my cross line were getting pregnant. In fact, this is juicy, but there was this guy who had gone platinum. He is what pushed the Syrian guy into emerald qual. He was dating one of his downline. I didn't know they were dating. I don't know that many people knew they were dating, but she got pregnant. And not too long later, they were getting married. And I just can't imagine what those council sessions were like, basically telling them, oh, you're pregnant, you have to get married. And I noticed that happening. Either people were getting pregnant and then getting married, or they were getting married and then immediately after getting pregnant.
That's like
times,
it's a very religious thing though. Like, that's just kind of how it goes. Like, I know a lot of people, like, I don't know a lot of people, I'm being dramatic, but a couple of people that I went to high school with got pregnant and married very young, and the only commonality was the religious aspect. Like, they were all religious because they have to wait till marriage to, so they're like, oh, I'm gonna get married at 19. Like, I think that's one of the biggest dangers of purity culture. I think that's very dangerous.
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
And they talk about that in this book too. They talk about like the sexual aspect of everything, and that's I know that comes very late, but it's like, it's dangerous stuff.
It really is. It is. And I agree with you wholeheartedly. I definitely think purity culture is very toxic. And I think it definitely produces, in my opinion, more divorces. Of course, I can't speak to the statistics, but like you, a lot of people, I mean, I got married at 18, not because of I felt like I needed to be pure or anything. I was long gone from that, but I was desperate to get out of my mom's house. I had a very narcissistic mother at the time. I say that at the time. My mom is a listener. She is getting so much help, so much better. We love her. But at the time, she was very toxic. And that's what I grew up with. And that's what I was desperate to leave. So I am also guilty of getting married and getting divorced. And we split up like 2 years later. So I can empathize with that. But a lot of it that I've seen, people, especially in like those really religious environments, like the LDS community, so many young people are getting married. And a lot of the stories that are now coming out are these people are unhappy. I love watching not anti, but like ex-Mormon TikToks or the ex-Mormon Reddit. It's so fascinating to me,
It
but it's probably
is.
because I know somebody who is ex-Mormon who grew up in that community and has taught me so many things. I'm like,
Yeah, the weird thing is like I wanted to live with Fisher before we were married, and Worldwide convinced me not to, basically. So what they were saying is basically, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? That's basically what they were saying is their mindset.
yikes.
So they were saying, if you move in together, there's no incentive for him to ever propose because he has everything. And I was like,
What?
yeah, that makes sense. Like I was just for that. And then they were saying that if you wait until you're married to live together, you have less of a chance to get divorced because you're committed. Like you're committing to not knowing what this other person is like to live with, and you're just committed to that. And it doesn't
Yeah,
matter because you're committed. You can't just break up and move out. And I think about
that's
that now.
insane.
That's horrifying.
I could not imagine because you learn how a person is when you live with them. I have had bad roommate situations and they were just friends because I didn't know how they were in real life. And I mean, us living together essentially ruined a friendship. Could you imagine not living with your partner? You get married, you finally move in together, and then you find out, dude, I hate this guy. Like, there's no way I can live with him.
Yeah. I
That's
mean,
what
we
they expect
like,
you to do?
yes. Like we waited till we were married to live together. I think we moved in like 2 months before we were getting married, but it was just because the timing the apartment became available.
Yeah.
But yeah, we were supposed to wait, and I was like, 2 months isn't really gonna do much. There's certain
Yeah.
quirks of Fisher. Like I don't have a lot that actually bugs me, but there's certain things that I'm like, oh, I didn't know you did things that way, and it's vice versa. Like we're like, oh, I didn't know that you didn't. I don't know, clean dishes right away after cooking. You know what I mean? Like little
Yeah.
things that you're
Little
like,
things.
yeah, and it's different when you live together because we spent a lot of time at each other's houses, but it's not the same at all.
Yeah, it is very different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so glad again. You and Fisher are such a like an anomaly because it's not common for people to leave Worldwide and stay married. At least from the
Yeah.
stories that I've heard. That doesn't mean that it doesn't happen outside of you guys. I'm sure it is. But a lot of the people who come to me are like, I had to leave my marriage because X, Y, and Z was happening behind closed doors. And Upline was forcing this to happen. So now I actually want to get into, I know it's a little bit further in the book, but you mentioned the things that they talk about sex.
Mm-hmm.
That really triggered me. I cannot enough say that I had to literally take a step back. I had to breathe because I cried because it was very triggering. I think
Yeah.
anybody who has been through any sort of infidelity can read that and say that's fucked up. So
Yeah.
trigger warning with this portion, because if this is you, even if you've never been through any sort of infidelity situation, I really think that this would be hard for any woman to hear, any partner for that matter. You know, it doesn't matter what gender you are. No partner wants to hear any of this crap. But this guy really like blames women for men cheating because they refuse sex. That is a thing in this fucking book. And I apologize for all of my bad language, but I'm also not, because this book pissed me off that bad. Here's this part. They really said this in the book. This is page 250. So if you want to check the book and you want to make sure I'm being honest, it's right there, page 250. It says, a wife also needs to think about how unfair it is to say to her husband, have eyes only for me, and continually turn him down when he approaches her sexually.
So bad. It's so horrifying. Yeah.
This part really, really upset me because you think about so I'm going to speak to my situation. So my significant other, Kyle, if you haven't heard about him, go listen to previous episodes. This was a very abusive person. And I could see him. And this is why I hope when you say, if this book gets into the wrong hands, this could absolutely turn into a very toxic relationship very fast. My ex, Kyle, was like that. So he read a book that I would love to also go into. It's called The Art of Seduction. This guy took notes. I found his notes that he was taking to be able to seduce victims because that,
So messed.
right. So imagine him finding this book, right? And saying, no, 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 it's right here. This is how you need to be in our relationship. It like justifies
Yeah.
the act of being infidelis. I always do that. The fact of
Yeah.
cheating, right?
Yeah.
um, but it's frustrating because I look back and I always did blame myself. I always blame myself. I was like, there's no, like, I was doing something wrong. Something was wrong with me that made him go and do this. And this book is backing that up. That creates such a level of insecurity in a
Oh,
partner that
absolutely.
is so hard to overcome. The therapy
Yeah,
that you
and
would need.
the worst part about it, like, these are very weak men. Like, I'm gonna say it. Like, these are very, like, men that do not have any sense of discipline. How did you get that far in your life without committing lust, basically? And then once you get married, then you're entitled to sex? Like, that makes no
Yeah,
sense. Like, and they're explaining it as if men have no self-control. Like, that's so insulting to men. Like,
it
and that's the
is.
thing that's like so weird. We need to hold men to a higher standard. Men are not like that. Decent men are not like that. Not after the age of like 23. When men are
Yeah.
young, you know what I mean? Like, they have different brains.
Yeah.
They're hormonal, you know what I mean? But this is like a 40-year-old man writing this book and saying, like,
Yeah.
if my wife doesn't give me sex or gains a little bit of weight or, whatever, I'm going to watch porn or cheat on her.
Yeah.
That's
And
messed up.
worldwide, you can tell so much now. Now that I've read this, I understand why they say the things that they do.
Mhm.
Because very much so, you hit the nail right on the head. Because what do
Yeah.
they teach us in nuts and bolts?
Yeah.
Do not show up wearing a low cut shirt. Your dress can't be too tight because men are visually stimulated and you're going to make some woman uncomfortable because they treat it as if men can't control themselves. They're just out there looking. Like I had never been more insecure than when I was a part of Worldwide. And
Oh,
I was
for sure.
insecure before that because
Yeah,
then
I
they would
agree.
create for incentives like did you guys ever have like a version of Splash?
No, I've never heard of that.
Okay, so our line of sponsorship, I don't have a name for them, but they're like this really old couple in the business and like really old. And they would throw this like big event that you had to qualify for. So it was one of our incentives during the summertime where if we did like the 30, 90-day, whatever core run that we did. We went over core run in the last episode. So if you don't know, it's basically where you're following all of their daily recommendations or whatever. And we could go. But it's because it was Splash, right? So it was at a what do they call it? It was at like a water, not a water park, but it was like at like a giant like woodsy area. It was like a
Cool.
Boy Scout camp thing that they would rent out, and there was like a lake. There was a bunch of stuff. So with a lake, swimsuits. So they would have specific requirements if you were going to wear a swimsuit. Basically, no piece swimsuits, no two piece, no two piece swimsuits, essentially,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
No two piece swimsuits. So,
Yeah.
but here's the caveat to that: you had upline who were looked up at. These were eagles. These were double eagles, dude. The girls were wearing like two pieces, but the top was long. So they could be okay. By the end of it, they were tucking them up. They were like pulling them like their tops like a little bit down. Like by the end of it, nobody cared. And then my upline, I was like, she even said, she's like, because one of our upline, you could tell she has fake boobs. She
Oh,
has 100%. That's the Syrian dude's wife. She actually owned, what's funny is they always say she owned a coffee shop. It was a bikini coffee shop. There's actually an article about the community that it was in trying to get her shut down because they did not want that in their community, whatever. So I remember talking to her and saying, and she looked at our upline and was like, I'm very insecure right now about having my husband around her. And it was so heartbreaking because this upline, Jenny, you can tell, especially with the stories that I've heard about her before the business, she was like a very dominant figure, very much like you and I, the extrovert, the one to like talk back if someone's messing with you. The business very much like quelled that part of her. and she became the subservient wife. And that was very, very hard because her whole life, kind of part of her story was that because she's Asian and apparently in her culture, it was not uncommon for her to be called fat. And she had a twin and she would be called the fat twin. And that was the hardest thing for me because I've been the fat kid. I'm still the fat kid. The insecurity that I have because of my weight is very, very hard. And in that environment, when you have these rules that people are not following and you're being told that men can't control themselves,
Yeah.
you're thinking, what the hell's going to happen next?
Yeah. And the weirdest part, they actually did a study very recently where they did sexually visualizing sexual visual pictures and had brain whatever things hooked up to your brain, and they did it for both men and women, straight men, straight women, gay women, all the kinds, and they would show them images, and the gay women and the straight men would react the same, and the straight women and the gay men would react. And we are equally as visual. Women are equally as visual, if that makes you feel better.
It
because
does.
we're told we're not. We're told we're not. And I know that, like, I can look at a good looking dude and be like, that's a good looking dude, and then just walk away. Like, I don't have to like be like, oh, I gotta bounce my eyes, I gotta do this, I gotta like, I don't feel that way. Like, we can acknowledge that everybody's beautiful, and we can say that. And that was one of the most like redeeming things for me, was just being like, there is a lot of women in this world that are beautiful, and I can acknowledge that they're beautiful, and it's okay if Fisher thinks they're beautiful too, because they are, and that's okay to think that way. But the way that they try to put a spin on it is being like, your husband's imagining sleeping with all of these people, and that's not true. It's just like admiring art. You're admiring the Mona Lisa the same way you admire beautiful people, but they keep trying to fit this narrative, so the man keeps coming out getting laid all the time by his wife, and it's messed up. And they don't ever talk about why the women don't want to sleep with their husbands. They don't talk about all the stuff that they had to do that day, how overstimulated they are from being touched by their children, how much cleaning they had to do, how much, they still have to do, and they're tired. I wouldn't want to work out, like, you know what I mean? Like,
screw that.
They're just tired.
I want to go to bed.
Yeah, but they don't talk about that. They're like, oh, you're depriving your husband. It's like,
I
had to do all this other stuff. If you want that, you got to take some stuff off of my plate. You know what I mean?
Right. And they don't say that. They never mention that. And they never even like, what about, like, why are our feelings as women not valued in this guy's perspective? Because that's the thing. We have to like jump over hurdles to respect our husbands, right? And he throws in a couple little like, oh no, women deserve respect too, but not enough. Like, this guy is really doing this, and yet he doesn't talk about the fact that, what about, like, what is depression not a real thing? Can we not feel, I mean, postpartum depression, just clinical depression, anxiety? There's a variety of emotions on top of what you said, all of these things that we have to do every day, plus these emotions that we're having. Like, sometimes that's not what we want to do, and that is valid. And for this to almost take away our consent to do that just hurts my soul, because he even says right here, so this is a little bit of a longer portion, but this I feel like is necessary to read because this really speaks volumes to this stupid fucking book. So the subtitle is called "A Dose of Respect Beats a Dose of Viagra Any Day." Being trapped by an adulteress is precisely what happened to the husband of a woman who wrote to me after she figured out why he had an affair. She realized that her husband had been craving admiration just as she craved love from him. He was ripe for having an admiring woman tempt him. And that's exactly what happened in his workplace. Even though they had enjoyed what people thought was a perfect marriage for more than 20 years, four teenage children, active in the church, successful business, etc., he strayed. They separated for a while, but then the wife realized. So again, this is a little bit of a longer portion, but this is what he claims this woman said to him. And I'm so like, you feel bad for these women. But essentially, she says, I had become so busy with life, kids, etc., that I had forsaken my husband in this area and left him vulnerable to attack from the enemy. He said he had been craving something, but he didn't know what it was until she began to give him what he was craving. His need for this was so strong that at one point during our separation, he was willing to give up everything: marriage, family, business, reputation, even his relationship with the Lord, just to continue feeling the respect and admiration he was receiving from this other woman. And that's not even the entire part.
Then get divorced. Like, that's the only solution. You don't cheat, you get divorced. You do the right thing. And you can be
Yeah.
honest about it while you get a divorce. You can be like, hey, I'm attracted to somebody else. They're making me feel a little bit better than you are, and bring the divorce to the table. Like, there's solutions that can, there's things like marriage counseling where it can be like, hey, I wanted this stuff from my wife and she wasn't giving it to me. So I started to be attracted to my coworker. And it's like, that's an okay thing to feel. It's an okay thing to say, but it's not okay to cheat. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Like, that's the line that was crossed, I believe.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's so weird.
It's
They
hard
talk
to
about
read
it.
that.
There's like a principle, I don't know what it's called, but it's like a 10% principle where it's like your wife can have 90% of the good things that you want, but if she doesn't hit the 10% that you really like do want, and somebody else has that 10%, you're gonna want that 10% or something like that. And that was like something, I don't know where I heard that, but that's why most men regret getting divorced, is because they're like, oh, that a woman only filled that 10%, but my ex-wife filled that 90% and just didn't have the small portion. And it's like,
That's so true.
yeah, but it's also like, why are these men so fragile? Like,
They
why are they so
are.
weak? These are not like, men are not like that. Men are like, the whole point of this book was for men to be like heroes and honored and respected. And they're like, this does not get you respect. This does not get you
No.
admired. This gets you, I look at you and I go, wow, that's a pathetic man. Like,
Yeah.
I don't think about them as a hero. I'm not like, wow, you really do deserve respect when you want to sleep with everyone. Yeah, you really
Yeah.
deserve that. Like, oh my
I
gosh, no.
Yeah. And this guy, so here's the man that he is praising. This is a man who supposedly wrote in. I'm going to read just the beginning of this because I don't feel that all of it needs to be read. I just feel like this first couple of portions is exactly what the author's saying, that this man is justified. Okay. So he says, I don't blame her for my immorality, but she doesn't own up to anything. I'm not blaming her, but she is not blameless. She never said she contributed to the problem. I want to forget it, but she won't let me forget it. I did wrong, but I didn't just one day decide to go out with another woman. If I had felt she respected me, maybe I wouldn't have done this.
This is horrifying. I will give you a little bit of hope though. A little bit of me.
Okay. Yes, we need the hope.
There was a woman, I talk about her all the time, Sheila Ray Gregoire. She does Bare Marriage podcast. She actually came out with a book in 2021 called The Great Sex Rescue. And the Great Sex Rescue surveyed 20,000 evangelical women and surveyed them on these types of books: Love and Respect, Every Man's Battle. There's a few like Sheet Music. There's some really bad marriage books out there that like basically have this whole narrative behind it. And she surveyed a bunch of Christian women and said, have you read this book? Did it harm you? What was your husband like? Is your husband abusive? Blah, 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 blah. And basically all of this data, put it into a book and said, these books are harming women. And said, there is a huge percentage of women that have read these books that you have done damage to them. And Emerson Eggerichs still comes back and goes, I still believe in what I said, even after all of that. So there is
Wow.
hope. There is somebody trying to fight this fight too. You know what I mean? So it's like, I listened to her. I started to listen to her before I quit Worldwide. And that's what made me go,
Really?
yeah, I went to my upline and I was like, love and respect is bad. And she's like, it's only bad if there's abuse. And I was like, how do you know there's abuse? Do you know that you're giving this to an abusive man? You don't know. You don't
Yeah,
know who you're
you're
giving
right.
this to. And that's the dangerous part of this book, is it creates such a bad narrative for people who already have these tendencies behind them. And that was my most infuriating part. But this book's selling really well. But she went to all the authors and said, I'm going to write this stuff about you. You can redact it. You can apologize. You can say, hey, I wrote this years ago. I don't feel that way anymore.
Yeah,
And none of them did that. Every single one of them stood behind what they said. Like,
that's not
even
surprising.
yeah, even Focus on the Family, like Focus on the Family is like a huge like Christian website. They promote like books and articles, and they're really big. They do, I think Worldwide does some stuff with them too. When Sheila went to them and was like, hey, you need to get rid of Love and Respect. You need to take this off of your website. They said no, and then they blacklisted her because like, have you guys
Gosh.
ever read this book? Like,
Yeah. I want to know who on the, what do they call it? Who on the board, right? The board of diamonds or whoever making these decisions. I mean, they're all a bunch of old people, except for maybe what
the single
God,
diamond lady.
except for the single diamond lady. Like, who's on this board? A bunch of like geriatric men. That's who. And they're the ones who now have trained their wives to be this subservient bullshit, which I fucking hate. I am so grateful to this day that I never had to say I'm a worldwide wife, because one of the things that they would always say, right, is they wanted people to get married, but then they knew that if somebody was going to be in a relationship with someone outside of the business, they would say, embrace your singleness. And it was only if it worked out for them. Like they would push whichever was going to keep you in the business. If a couple was in the business, they would really heavily push, get married, get married, get married. If you were in the business, you started dating out of the business and that person was not coming around to meetings, you need to embrace your singleness. You need to be what your diamond husband is looking for, is exactly the way that they would fucking say it. I can hear Taylor's wife saying this shit. And they would always say things like, they would condemn sleeping together before marriage. Like, let's be fucking real. Who outside of the fucking Mormon church is waiting until marriage? We're not. Okay.
No.
Let's be real. So instead of fucking condemning your downline for sleeping with their partner, because they'd be like, if you weren't sleeping with this person, you guys wouldn't even be together. That's the only reason you're staying in this relationship. Like, I have no shame for that whatsoever. Like, live your life, but stop shaming us because you found Jesus in Worldwide. But a lot of people found Jesus when they came to Worldwide. My dad always says I didn't know he was lost, just because I always say it like that.
Yeah.
But why is that? We're adults. Am I supposed to counsel upline? Hey, so I met this person. I'm really interested in them. Can I be intimate with them? What?
Oh my gosh, that's so gross. I remember Rianne sending me and Kate about living with Fisher before we were married, and this is like the whole thing. And she was like, you just do whatever you want all the time without commitment. Like that was like her biggest thing, was being like, you need to be committed before you do stuff like that. And I was like, I'm still committed even though I don't have a ring on my finger. I'm still I'm like, we're 20 years old, like at the time we were 20, and I was like, no real rush. And then I remember talking to Fisher and he was like, well, if we go platinum, like we'll get married at platinum. And I was like, yeah, that's fine. I was like, I can wait. I don't care. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
And then, but we also thought that was a lot closer than it was. But he was like,
right.
When we go platinum, we'll get married. And I was like, sweet. And then we can have a good wedding. We'll have the cash flow for it. And then John was like, basically had a long talk with Fisher and convinced him to marry me. And that's why we're married. It would have happened eventually. Like, that's the thing.
Right.
Like, I know it would have happened eventually, but it wasn't by either of our choice, Oh my goodness. You know what else is crazy? I've never told you this too. We got married on July 1st, 2018. It was a Sunday. So that's Canada Day. Go Canada. I'm just kidding.
It's okay.
There was a regional rally on June 30th, a Saturday.
No.
Yeah. So we originally wanted to get married on the 30th because we're like, oh, we'll always have the next day off, So we're like, okay, we'll get married the 30th. And we had to change our wedding date because I had my uplines.
Because of
in my it worked out because now like we get fireworks every year on our anniversary and stuff like that's
true that.
cool, but they ended up canceling the regional because they always forget about us Canadians and our national holidays. So they were like, oh right, you have Canada Day the next day, so we got to reschedule this. So they rescheduled it to a week before, so it ended up working out, but we still had our wedding date changed.
That is crazy. I mean, honestly though, what a cool holiday to get married on. I mean, I would personally love to have an anniversary. I wanted one of my kids to be born on 4th of July, but I got Veterans Day. So just looking back at everything, I see now why Worldwide has as many misogynistic rules as they do. Because in this book, even I don't have bookmarked where, but even he says, women just can't leave the house or can't lead the household because that's just not how God intended it to be. And that does not explain to me shit. Why on earth is that not okay?
It doesn't make any sense because I don't think there's anywhere in the Bible that says that.
Yeah,
Like,
that's what he claims.
it makes no sense. Adam and Eve both ate the apple. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
and
I just can't imagine that anybody in worldwide would even take responsibility for this.
yeah. And I think the worst part is talking in absolutes. It's like saying all men are taller than all women. And it's like, no, most men are taller than most women. It's not an absolute
Yeah.
fact. And that's where this line, this book teeters that line of speaking in absolutes that way. They're like, all women want to feel this way. All men want to feel this way. I remember Fisher reading that sexuality chapter and being like, I just want you to know I do not relate to anything that chapter said. And he's like, the rest of it I kind of can get, but that chapter was an absolute no. And I was like, okay, good.
Yeah,
Because that's
thankfully.
horrifying. Yeah.
That
He
really
made sure
was.
to make
And that's good. That's so good because
yeah.
I can't imagine how many men were like, well, this chapter says, like, how dare you? Someone in your upline is encouraging
Oh,
that. And I could see it
yeah.
because of this book, because
And like
they're preaching this.
yeah, and there's like that fine line of you did something to entice them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because they try to say that. Like I had a question about that splash thing that you went to. Did they tell the men they had to wear shirts?
Nope.
Yeah, and that just explains it all. Even though
It
we're just
does.
as visual, there's studies done saying we're just as visual. And men didn't have to put their shirts on. Like it just again, this whole weak men mindset, this toxic masculinity, it's so dangerous. And it's
It
dangerous to
really
women.
is.
Like the way that we look and feel about men now is not great when not all
No,
men are
it's
like this, and we need to hold
absolutely.
them. Yeah, it's just extremely frustrating. Like
It's mind-blowing because then you have parts in the book, right, where he says that so the song RESPECT became something of a theme for many women, but what most of them did not realize is that song was really written by a man, Otis Redding, 2 years before Aretha sang it. Otis released the song as a single on August 15th, 1965, as his message to his wife.
Emerson Eggerich's dad choked his mom. And I don't know if that's like a true thing. I'm trying to find it. Yeah, so it says like a deserting wife can return like a prodigal. Physically abusive spouse can change and stop the abuse.
Oh yeah,
yeah,
I
like
forgot. I wanted to go into that part too.
yeah, and it talks about like weird stuff in here. Like I remember it being like my father's violent fits of temper finally became too much and they ended up getting divorced. And he basically was saying like it was because yeah, my father is strangling my mother. He has her against the refrigerator. Sorry, trigger warning.
Oh, holy shit. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. He has her up against the refrigerator, hands around her throat, and he's choking her. I run to help and hit my dad, but I have tiny fists trying to make him stop. And he basically says something about how his mother started respecting him, his dad, and then they were okay. It's called My Own Father Appeared to Have Evil Will, and it's on loveandrespect.com.
Oh,
Yeah.
so it might not be in the book, but it's definitely on the website.
Yeah, because I remember
That's
hearing this and going like something, I remember this choking thing. So yeah, it's not in the book, but it's on the website. This guy's weird.
well, that kind of goes into the next part that we had talked about just before, was the portion where he talks about the husband who went to jail because he threw a plate at his wife's face, right? And then he went to jail. Supposedly he sat and thought about it, and God spoke to him, and he's so forgiving of himself, and like he demands forgiveness, and he goes and he changes and he does all these domestic violence classes. Let me tell you, that is not how that works. Maybe it worked for this one guy, maybe it works in very, very certain situations, very few, because this exact same thing happened to me. My ex-significant other, Kyle, went to prison and proclaimed that he was a changed man because he found Jesus. He would start quoting the Bible in every which direction. He came out and did domestic violence classes. This guy would go to re-abuse 3 months later. He would go to re-abuse 2 high school girls and is back in prison. Jail is a revolving door for abusive men.
Yeah, you know
and
who
women,
else found
but mostly
Jesus?
men.
You know who else found Jesus? Jeffrey Dahmer.
Oh yeah, he did.
Like, I like, like it's not a be all end all. Like I can
No.
believe that people can change, but I
Yeah.
believe that
Oh, yeah.
trauma messes with people. People aren't
Yeah.
who they are when they're traumatized, and unless they figure out the root of where all of this stuff is coming from and then work from the ground up, I don't think people are really going to change. That's my biggest
Yeah.
thing.
No, it's
um,
I 1000% agree, because you just the statistics are not in their favor. I'm sorry,
no.
but they're not. The amount of domestic abuse that happens and I'm not from Canada, but I know in the United States it is tens of millions, and that's not even accounting to the people who go, it goes unreported. And not
Yeah.
very many even go to jail. But when they do go to jail, in fact, I was reading an article that was, I think it was written like 8 years ago, but I believe it. It says that when you send abusers to jail, it can make them more aggressive and more
Yeah,
abusive. Let me tell you, that happened to Kyle.
I
So
could see
this
that.
book is dangerous. And I'm
Yeah.
so grateful that I had the opportunity to really digest this, because I was really not okay after reading it.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And I think the fact that Worldwide is pushing such misogyny is so dangerous to people. These messages are not okay. I mean, the not just this book. I've listened to Upline in their Night Owls. If you don't know what a night owl is, basically it's where a group of people kind of get around this one particular leader and ask them questions, and they answer because they're brainwashed enough that they can do that. One of them, she would preach that the business helped her get off of antidepressants. That is another very fucking dangerous message. They're very anti-medication. They don't treat depression like it's fucking real.
If you have a heart problem, are you going to be on medication? Like, yes,
Exactly.
it just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not real. I
Exactly.
hate the way that they talked about medication. When I was out and found out that I had ADHD, I was like, everything makes sense. I
Yeah,
was like,
same.
this all makes sense. I literally was like, I can't sit in a board plan. I could not sit for that long. I was going nuts, man.
Yeah.
They thought it was a maturity thing, and I was like, it's not a maturity thing. I can't fucking sit still.
It was bad. I remember the Syrian guy, he would always say, well, they said I had ADHD and they just wanted to medicate me. And if you're medicating your child, blah, 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 blah. And it's like,
Yeah,
bro, I'm so fucking grateful I left Worldwide, because that mentality kept me from medicating my child. I mean, respectfully, if you're out there and you like disagree with medicating kids, like that's your opinion. And I respect that.
yeah,
But also this medication has been around for over like decades. And these are professionals that I trust, that I've done a lot of research on. So if that's
yeah,
you, like if you're going to be judgy, like fuck you. But I'm happy I did that for my kid, and I did that for
yeah.
myself. And
It's life-saving. It really is
it
life-saving because
really is.
you're preventing future drug problems, you're preventing suicide, you're preventing them from getting depressed, because we're all susceptible to those things because we have such low dopamine. So we get medicated early, we won't become addicts later in life. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Which is a very common thing with people with ADHD, because we're searching for that next high all the time.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
Absolutely. And it really all stems from books like this. Books
Yeah.
like this are being pushed every day in Worldwide. And again, if that's something that you want to be a part of, we're not telling you don't be a part of Worldwide. We are saying if this is something that you don't want to be a part of, this is what you can expect. The honeymoon phase goes away. You guys, this is something that we didn't see it at first. We didn't just walk in and they were like, hey, we're going to feed you these toxic things. They groom you into this process. And then soon enough, you're reading a book like this, and then you're saying, my spouse cheated on me. I have to forgive him because I did X, Y, and Z. And that's not okay. We are I know for me, I'm very pro women. I'm pro people. I don't care what gender, what you identify as. I'm pro you, and you should never have to deal with this. If you have a story to share about Worldwide, please just know this is a safe space. We are here for you. We are here to help support you. I've had so many people say that and I'm so grateful for this. So thank you to everybody who's reached out, who has said that hearing our stories helps you digest it. Because when we leave Worldwide, oftentimes we don't have the friends that we did. We don't have the family members, the family connections that we did. And a lot of the times when we leave this cult-like environment, we're alone. And that is our goal, is to make you feel less alone, to make you feel educated, to make you feel like validated. Everything that you're feeling, we have felt. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Hope, for coming back. You are obviously going to be a reoccurring character in this story. You and Fisher
Yay.
are always welcome. People love you guys. The amount of people who have been like, "Hey, I heard Hope's story and I can relate. I was downline from the same people," or, the things that she's talked about, the things that Fisher has talked about. Like these guys are fantastic. I cannot thank them enough for coming here, for being vulnerable, for talking about this stuff. It's not easy. So, again, thank you so much for coming. Please follow us on Instagram, you guys. I am doing my best to post as much as possible. You can follow me on TikTok and Instagram, both at XsandT_podcast. We're going to be uploading Tuesdays and Fridays. So stick around. We'll see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.